Welcome to the TNF podcast. Like, comment, share, subscribe, click on that bell for notifications. And if you're listening on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, give us a follow and give us a rating. That would be fantastic. I also have a merchandising company called Hell's Heart Merch Company. Go on over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code podcast for 20% off of your entire order. They're fine Bella Canvas Next Level Tri Blend t shirts. They are hardcore themed, movie themed. So if you like those things, go on over and check it out. Think you'll like them. They're really soft shirts. I like them. So I have a few things to promote. My friend John Cuccinello from the band OS 101, Hogan's Heroes, has a book called Come Inside and Meet My Punk Rock Family. It is a graphic novel that chronicles all the characters that he has met within the hardcore and punk rock scene. The profits will go to the St. Jude's Children's Organization. So pick a copy of that up at revhq.com. They're going fast. It's a limited press. So I think you'll like that one too. I also have a QR code that I'm going to put up in the show. It's for the benefit for Luke Collar's Cancer Recovery Fund. Please donate to him. He's an awesome guy. He's been on the show. His brother Pete's been on this show, and they could really use your help. Also, the Hardcore Legends trading cards is doing some raffles and auctions. So if you follow them on Instagram, they've got some really cool merchandise that they're auctioning off, raffling. So please check that out. That's a great thing that he's doing too. He's also been on this show. Um, so my next guest today, he is a really talented guitar player. He has played in the melodic hardcore punk band called Crime and Stereo. They put out quite a few releases, and I've been following them for quite some time. And they've had such a progression in their sound. They're always really doing something interesting, and it'll be really interesting to see what they do here in the future. But ladies and gentlemen, Alex Dunne. Thanks
Hey.
so much for being here, Alex.
Hey, what's going on? Thank you for having me. Stoked to be here.
What's going on with you, man?
Nothing. Sunday podcasting.
Sunday podcasting. That's what
Yeah,
I do
hell
every
yeah.
week, man.
Hell
Yeah.
yeah.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Well, dude, yeah, thanks for being on the show. The first question that I typically ask to all the guests is, what was your relationship with music growing up? Did you have family members that played music? Did you play in any sort of like high school bands or proto bands before Crime and Stereo? And then what was your first non-metal and non-hardcore concert? And then how did that seg into hardcore and punk rock for you? What was your first show?
Okay. So growing up, I loved music for as long as I can remember. It wasn't really a family thing. I'm not really sure how I got struck by like the music bug, but I remember having like the White Snake cassette, and I had Beastie Boys' License to Ill on cassette. Those were the first two cassettes that I ever bought. I remember that at Caldor. I don't know if anybody remembers Caldor. It was like an old department store on Long Island, and so I always we used to do these, like, me and my brother would put on these like fake concerts for my parents and grandparents, you know, where we would have like an inner tube and a tennis racket and pretend to play drums and guitar. So yeah, I was always obsessed with music. It really was just like the thing that found me. It's not like I got it from my family or anything like that. And what's the second thing?
Did you play in any sort of high school bands or
Oh,
anything like that?
yes. So when I was in high school, I was in a band called The Rookie Lot, which was it was myself, Brandon Riley from The Movie Life, and then three of the guys who went on to become Brand New. That was my first band, and we were all just friends from the same town who started a band, and it was sick. It was really crazy to be in a high school band that got to play real shows. We played with Silent Majority and Glassjaw and Clockwise and Inside. That was like my first like 5 shows were opening up for Inside. So I just happened to be a kid during like the golden era of Long Island hardcore, and I was obsessed with it. It was my whole life when I was a kid. And I was just lucky enough to have a band that was pretty cool. And then all the cool local bands, had us open for them. And that was an amazing experience. And yeah, never stopped, basically.
What was your first non-metal and non-hardcore concert? And then kind of how did you end up, like what was your first show? How did you end up, kind of getting involved in that scene?
So I went to a lot of concerts when I was young. My mom took me to see Gloria Stefan and the Miami Sound Machine when I was like 4 or 5 years old or something. I remember that being my first concert ever. I actually like have memories of it. And I was super lucky, as anybody of my generation was. It was like I was in middle school when Nevermind came out, and Dookie, and the Downward Spiral, and all of these records. And Nassau Coliseum is down the street from where I live. I'm from Levittown, and it's basically 2 towns over in Uniondale on Hempstead Turnpike, which is like the main drag in Levittown. I mean, it was essentially walking distance from where, or at least bike riding distance from where we grew up. And so like my whole young childhood, I mean, I remember going to, again, we saw Green Day on the Dookie tour, and No Doubt on the Tragic Kingdom tour, and Red Hot Chili Peppers on One Hot Minute, and Nine Inch Nails on Downward Spiral. And so even when I was young, we were going to, like, me and my friends were going to sick concerts, all the time, because everyone was basically an arena band at that point. It was like every band. Bush, I remember going to see Bush on 16 Stone. It was like every band that came out was an arena headliner, and the arena was like right down the street. And right around from that, I got into it. That was probably when I was in like 6th grade. And then by the time I was in 7th grade, I was like a BMX kid, and BMX and skateboarding was super big, as a very niche thing. This was before the X Games, so it was a very niche crowd. And from that, I got into Minor Threat and Bad Religion. Those were probably like my first 2 real bands at the time, so I was big into Minor Threat and Bad Religion, and then got into Dag Nasty and Avail and Gorilla Biscuits. And so it started for me, again, remember, it's like, this is probably 1993 or something like that, 1994. So right as I kind of started getting into that style of music, it was like Rancid hit, Pennywise, Bad Religion, the whole Epitaph era basically hit, Offspring smash, like right at that exact moment. And so I was a punk rocker, a BMX, punk rock kid. And then VOD happened. The VOD Still 7-inch happened. And that was my my introduction. I had never conceived of a local scene. It's like I couldn't have imagined what that looked like, or, again, as a kid, it's like I had been to concerts, but I had never been to a show. I could not have conceived of such a thing. And then I just remember we used to all hang out at this skate park, and it was like there was this one summer, and everybody was talking about VOD, and it was a 7-inch. And again, like, it was like your parents had a record player at that point. Everybody, it was all CDs. You would never, as like a 12-year-old kid, you had never seen a record player. You didn't know what a 7-inch was. And so everyone was trading cassette, like, everybody had copied the 7-inch onto cassette and was, copying, I want to say burning, but obviously that's not the verb for this. Everyone was dubbing cassettes and kind of passing them around. And I just remember there was this like one summer that everybody was talking about VOD, and I hadn't heard it, and I didn't know what it was. And finally at the skate park, somebody gave me a cassette, and it was the VOD still 7-inch on one side and 25 to Life short fuse 7-inch on the other side. And that was like my first introduction to that hardcore was a thing, that any of this existed. At first, I did not get it, because the punk rock bands that I had been listening to were all very melodic. And so hearing, VOD, it was, I vibed with it. I actually distinctly remember that it was because Tim Williams sung, that he screamed and sung, that was actually like the hook for me. It was like I was always waiting for like when he busted into the singing part, which again was like later Poison the Well and Glassjaw, and was kind of like replicated by an entire generation of bands. But at the time when VOD first came out, it's like he was really the only person doing like the full-blown scream into the singing voice. And I also distinctly remember being so confused by 25 to Life and Rick Healy's vocal delivery, which later I went on to, understand that like, oh, he's just doing Roger Murray. Like he, is just copying Agnostic Front, and that's what he's trying to do. But I had never heard Agnostic Front at that point. I just remember being like, what is this? Like, what is this guy doing with his voice? Like, what is this supposed to be? And again, I was like a 12-year-old kid who had had never experienced that before. But that was how I got into the concept of hardcore. And then when I got to high school, the bass player of Overthrow, who was 2 years older than me, I took a freshman music class as a freshman, which, is just so insane, like how long ago this was that they had us doing reel-to-reel stuff in this music class. They taught us how to splice reels and, patch different reels together and edit that way. And we were in the same class. And one day I came in wearing like an Avail shirt. And this dude who scared the hell out of me because he was very scary looking and always wore like Cannibal Corpse shirts and like all this death metal shit. He was like, "Oh, you're into punk rock?" And I was like, "Yes." And he was like, "Check out my band," and gave me the first Overthrow, the Orange Overthrow demo. And then maybe a couple of months later, they were playing a show. They were opening for 25 to Life. It was 25 to Life, 1 for 1. No redeeming social value at this club, the Roxy in Huntington, which doesn't exist anymore. And so I went to see the band of this dude that I went to high school with, and that was my first hardcore show. And then it was like the next weekend there was an H2O show at the PWAC, and I also distinctly remember that was like a big thing for me at the time was the H2O self-titled, the first self-titled record, and Avail, I want to say it was 4 a.m. Friday, came out like right on top of each other. And what was the Dave Smalley's band, Down by Law? Like, so right kind of when I got into hardcore, then I became aware of melodic hardcore, and it was like, oh, this is more my thing, and always that has been I've always been like a melodic hardcore guy. I do love some traditional heavy hardcore bands, but that's never really been my avenue. And I do remember, it's kind of a shame over time. I think that H2O has, and obviously, Toby's a legend and everybody, knows him and everything, but I don't think that they get the credit that they deserve for when that first record hit, the Blackout record, and it opened with My Friends Look Out For Me Like Family. It was like that record brought so many kids of the like BMX skateboard kind of punk Epitaph Fat Wreck sort of world. I think that record was so many kids like entryway into hardcore because it was so accessible and it was so catchy, and there were these giant sing-alongs, and they were a hardcore band. It was kind of like mentally, that I think that was like a big moment for me early on, was being like, oh, you can be in a hardcore band and still be catchy. And again, and I think I'm going to say I probably didn't hear Start Today until after H2O. I bet H2O was like the first band that I heard like that, and then later went backwards and I heard Start Today, and I heard like the old American Standard records and bold, running like thieves and all that stuff. But H2O was like really kind of that first album hit at probably like the exact right moment to really like lock me in as both a hardcore dude, but also with the understanding of that you could be on this melodic, catchy side and still be hardcore. Again, like Silent Majority at that point was like on their first 7-inch. They were still like, or maybe they were on the distant second 7-inch, but they weren't like a headliner or anything like that. You know, like they were still playing second on shows or third down on shows. And again, that melody also is very much part of the Long Island history. So then once I got into Long Island hardcore, now there's Clockwise and Inside and Silent Majority and Mind Over Matter, and all of these bands were some degree of melodic.
Because I definitely remember H2O as well in high school, and we always associated them with being a punk band just because of the Epitaph Records Association. And I'm kind of with you on the whole melodic hardcore thing. Like, that was, come to think of it, probably my first exposure to hardcore, but not in, like you said, the traditional sense, like your Agnostic Front or your, even 25 to Life or anything like that, or Vision of Disorder. I found them much later on, which, one thing I wanted to comment about the Vision of Disorder connection is that Tim Williams almost reminds me of Alice in Chains in his vocal delivery. He's got that real kind of raspy, like soulful delivery. And I think that is correct. That's definitely what set them apart from other hardcore bands of the era, was that they weren't doing any singing, but Tim was just bringing it. And he had a great voice too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, he was, again, it's just like everybody, unfortunately, everybody can't get remembered forever. And with Long Island, what happened was some of the people that came later, the like Daryl Palombos of the world, became so famous and became so well known that like those are the guy. There's kind of a class of guys from Long Island that everybody remembers now. But it's like Tim Williams was the first rock star. Like, I mean, he was such a big deal on Long Island. And it was, I just like, he was like an actual rock star. And this was still when everybody's playing in basements and, shitty bars. And, there was no infrastructure of like, I remember distinctly when VOD played Tommy Knockers, which now is Irving Plaza. So way back when, Irving Plaza used to be called Tommy Knockers. And I remember when VOD headlined there, Tripface, so they had Tripface come and open for them. But it was like this mind-blowing thing that a hardcore band was playing a real club, like a real venue where like there are tickets for sale. It's like everybody now just takes all of that for granted, that the full kind of corporatization of music. But back then, that was like the craziest thing. And Tim Williams was, I just remember he was the first dude, he was the first white guy I ever saw with dreadlocks. He was the first guy I ever saw with bleached hair. He was the first guy I ever saw with the septum ring. Like all of these things that kind of became like tropes of the late 90s. He was the first dude, and it was just like mind-blowingly cool. And he was just so far out in front of everything. And really, like, before Long Island hardcore was even like off the ground, like those dudes were playing arenas with Pantera and bands like that. Like they really did set the blueprint. And quite frankly, there never is a Glassjaw if there's not VOD. Glassjaw really opened up the world for all of Long Island, but not Glassjaw really rode VOD's coattails, like that. The VOD is the reason that like major labels were coming to shows on Long Island. And really at the time, and I remember this distinctly, was that like Glassjaw was pegged as the next VOD. And that was like where they started kind of getting all of this, hype, was because of VOD was just like this rocket ship to the moon.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I don't know that I would make the correlation, because I think that VOD and Glassjar worlds apart when it comes to songwriting is concerned, but I could see how they definitely opened the door for a lot of even exposure to the Long Island hardcore scene. Joe from Tension was on this show, and he was talking about how Long Island was courted by so many major labels because of there was just a really distinct sound that was coming out of there. There was a lot of really talented bands, and it seemed like that was almost something that they could sink their talons into.
I remember again before Glassjaw was a headliner. They were like an opener for years before they caught on. And I remember there was a show. This was like right when they started to catch on. I think it was right when they did like the Kiss Kiss Bang Bang EP, and they played this catering hall in Long Island, Deja One, and Darcy from Smashing Pumpkins was there. And she was there with like somebody from TVT, right? I don't know if anybody remembers TVT, but they were
TVT Interscope, yeah.
yeah, exactly. They were like, well, they were like one of the first majors to try to like dip their toes into this world. And I remember like everybody being like, holy shit, like that's the girl from Smashing Pumpkins, and she was here to see Glassjaw. And that was when they were still, this is before they signed to Roadrunner or any of that.
Yeah, that TVT Interscope, you were mentioning Nine Inch Nails, that was their label back in the day. Do you feel like Vision of Disorder in the grand scheme of things is kind of underrated?
Yes, because I will say this. I think there are a lot of bands from Long Island. I think Glassjaw is also one of them. I think there are a lot of bands from Long Island that if you weren't here when it happened, and then you just go years later and you listen to the records, you're like, I don't get it. Like if you talk to anyone from Long Island, they're like VOD is like basically the starting point for all of Long Island hardcore. But I know that then these people go and they're like, oh, I don't know this band. Let me go and check them out. And they listen and they go, this is some new metal band. Like I don't get it. And people say that about Glassjaw, and they say it about a million bands. And so I do think they're underrated because they were on a world arena tour with Pantera. Then they, even the Green record, what everybody calls the Green record, the self-titled, first record. It's got some new metal stuff, but again, it's also at the time new metal wasn't a thing. So you can't it's only retroactively that you can apply that label to them, because at the time nobody else was doing that. Again, another VOD thing. I had never seen Drop D before. I had never seen a band playing Drop D, which obviously now it's like in the early 90s, that's what everyone was doing. But as a kid, I was like, oh, like, what is this crazy, style of playing that they're doing? And that went on to be like a new metal staple. But nobody, the screaming and singing became a trope. But at the time, it was totally unique. Nobody else was doing it. And I will also say that, like, hardcore now has much more of a sameness that it didn't then, which is weird because all of the bands now that largely can easily be lumped together, they all cite the same bands as influences. But at the time, all of these bands sounded totally different. Like Sick of It All, who was still my all-time favorite hardcore band. And they were the number one hardcore band of my youth. But it was like, when I got into them, it was on Scratch the Surface, which is still one of the best albums I've ever heard. But then they followed that up with Built to Last. Yeah. And then Built to Last is a melodic hardcore record. And that was huge and was gigantic. And Agnostic Front, right around that time, that was like when they did the Gotta Go era on Epitaph. And it never, like now, and I don't mean this pejoratively, but I do think that if you looked at the hardcore landscape at large, almost every band seems like they're doing Madball. It's like, it's almost like all of hardcore is some version of Madball, or maybe like Age of Quarrel era Cro-Mags, but there is like a very Madballness to all of hardcore. And at the time, and I loved Madball. I've always loved Madball. But at the time, they were just one band. They were one band, and they sounded like that. And all of the other bands sounded like other things. And everybody was doing their own thing. Warzone sounded like Warzone, and Gorilla Biscuits sounded like Gorilla Biscuits. Murphy's Law had saxophone parts and all this crazy shit, you know, sick of it all. Almost every record was like trying a different thing, you know, in like the Just Look Around era, they were like doing Biohazard kind of stuff. And then, you know, the Blood, Sweat, and Tears stuff was thrash. And then they kind of nail their sound on Scratch the Surface, but it has the big hit single in Step Down. And then, you know, the Good Looking Out record, Built to Last, is almost like an entire record of them doing Step Down. And anyway, it really did feel at the time like there was more heterogeneity, you know, whatever, to everything than there is now. Again, now, I mean, I think if like a Murphy's Law came out now, people would just be like, I don't know what to do with this. You know, I don't. The other thing too, I will say, is that the genreification of shows does not benefit anybody, in my opinion.
No.
That every show, it's like, here's a melodic hardcore show, here's the emo show, here's the show where every band sounds like Madball, here's the, you know, this other thing or whatever. But when I was a kid, I'm sure like with you too, it's like Inside and Tension. Like I grew up on Tension. It was like Inside and Tension and Clockwise. Like Inside is an emo band. Like they sounded like Mineral. And Tension is like, was the heaviest, you know, kind of traditional hardcore. And Clockwise was a, you know, melodic hardcore band. And Mind Over Matter was just weird as hell, doing like space stuff that you didn't understand. The vocalist was using Boss pedals. I had never seen that before. And all of these bands were always on the same shows. And I know that's like a very old guy talking point to be like mixed bills, whatever, you know, but like it was beneficial. It was beneficial to the bands. It was beneficial to the crowds, to developing tastes, different tastes. Like I think that all of the people that grew up from my generation, like knew all the ska bands and knew all the metal bands and they knew all the punk bands. And now I feel like you're like, nah, you know, if I'm like a Knocked Loose guy, it's like I could tell you all the 30 bands that sound like Knocked Loose, but then I don't listen to anything else.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not true. That's how I perceive it.
Sure, I definitely perceive it the same way. And attention to any promoters that are listening, bring back mixed
Yeah.
bills because it was just so eclectic and interesting, and you could really expand your musical horizons by seeing a band that isn't nearly so homogenous as the rest of the bands. And I think that just made for a really interesting era in hardcore. And you could even look at the Victory style samplers or the Only the Strong compilations. And Victory at the time was a really great label in that they really tried to kind of corner the market on all those genres and all those
Yeah.
different sounds. And yeah, I think that's something that's kind of been lost in recent years, definitely. But Crime and Stereo definitely had a really unique flair to what the Long Island scene was offering and the hardcore scene in general. What was the basis for the inception of that band? What was the catalyst that kind of got it all going?
I was in the rookie lot in high school, and then after high school, all of my kind of peers just like went to doing full-time bands, and I went to college, and I tried to do I did a band in college with my best friend Mike, and it just didn't work because it was ultimately like directionless. Like we just kind of were like doing whatever, you know, and it just wasn't very good. And then we broke up and had this, you know, Mike was like, I want to do a hardcore band. And I was like, great, let's do it. But again, like in my mind, it was like my style of hardcore at that time was By the Grace of God and Lifetime and Avail and As Friends Rust, early As Friends Rust, and of course Silent Majority. So if you listen to the very first Crime and Stereo demo, the 3-song demo, you can see that it's like our attempt at being like a real hardcore band, you know, kind of being like heavier and choppier and things like that. And I think then very quickly we landed in our niche, which was, you know, the Lifetime, Silent Majority, As Friends Rust kind of thing. And really that's the basis for Crime and Stereo. It was trying to be some amalgamation of those three bands. So, Lifetime, Silent Majority, As Friends Rust, Avail, By the Grace of God. I mean, like, Avail is in my DNA, in my blood. I think, to be honest with you, what is characterized as the Long Island Sound is the attempt at being Avail and Lifetime. I think it is those two bands, and this is even early Lifetime, because even Silent Majority, when they were writing and recording Life of a Spectator, those guys were obsessed with Hello Bastards before Jersey's Best even happened. And I think that really that's pretty much what the Long Island Sound is like all of these bands attempt at doing Hello Bastards meets 4 a.m. Friday and Dixie. And I just think that we followed the path that was set out before us. We didn't invent that for sure. And I think we are ultimately a Long Island hardcore band, which is it's like in the eye of the beholder. Like, some people, we still see all the time that people call us an emo band. And we get called a hardcore band, we get called a melodic hardcore band, we get called a post-hardcore band. And that's, again, if people go, everybody knows that kind of Silent Majority's Life of a Spectator is the blueprint for Long Island hardcore, but it's like, go listen to it. It's not a traditional hardcore record by any means, like by any stretch of the imagination. And Mind Over Matter was that way, and all these bands were like that.
I wanted to post a comment from Chris Raffini. He's in here. Alex, fire. And then he says, Distance Records, 1998.
Yes. We so my friend Mike, who I said that I created Crime in Stereo with, there was a brief time that we were trying to do a record label. We named it Distance Records off of a song on Ignite, Call on My Brothers, which was like an album that I was obsessed with at the time. There's a song on that called
Great album.
And we had a 1-for-1 Overthrow split 7-inch that we had recorded and paid to have pressed, and then we were both in high school and ran out of money, and so it never came out. And we still have all of the records and are kind of reviving it now. The label was slowly in the process of reviving the label to ultimately still release this Overthrow 1-for-1 split that we had. Also, let me just say this for anybody that's out there that is listening. When you talk about underrated, 1-for-1 is the most heartbreakingly forgotten band in like East Coast hardcore history. 1-for-1 was so great and was so amazing. The riffs were so good, and it's shocking that it never ceases to shock me as we all get older and become older guys, like the bands that people just forget about entirely. And you're just like, damn, I can't believe that like nobody knows about 1-for-1 now. But 1-for-1 was a band from Jersey. It's literally 1 ONE, the digit 4, and then ONE, 141. They were from Jersey, and they came up under like 25 to Life, even though they sound nothing like 25 to Life. And they were just amazing. And they're a band that, I think a lot of people have forgotten about, but I was obsessed with that band when I was a kid.
Let's see here. Okay, no more comments. Yeah, it's really heartbreaking when you got to experience some of those bands and they're good, they're amazing, but in the grand scheme of things, they're, like you said, kind of lost to the sands of time.
Yeah.
That's one of the biggest disappointments in hardcore, is that there is such a great back catalog of bands that may never get known just because they're either overshadowed by some of the other prolific hardcore bands, or it's just one of those things where it just ends up in a hardcore encyclopedia.
Yeah. Yeah. A thing that is kind of also a shame of it, again, this is, a time and place. I hate saying that, but like you had to be there. But as we move further into like modernity, everyone is so good at their instruments. Like kids now, it's like if you go see a band play and these kids are 16 years old, they're all shredding. Like everybody is dope at all of and everybody is good at everything. And when we were growing up, like, no one, if you could play your instrument even at all, you were one of the biggest bands in your local scene. Like, if
Right.
you could do like an E chord chug breakdown, like you were one of the biggest bands. I remember like Trip Face was like growing up was like my favorite, other than Silent Majority, my favorite local hardcore band. And I remember thinking that Jay May was a wizard. Like I thought that he was a wizard from another planet, and I did not understand how he was doing any of this stuff. But now I go back and listen to it, and I'm like, oh, this is actually like three chords, and most of it is like an open E chord. And so there is unfortunately somewhat of an element of that you had to be there, because now for so much of this stuff, if you tell someone like, yo, go back and listen to this record, and you're listening to it with a modern ear, you're like, nah, man, this doesn't hit me like that.
Yeah.
So some of it does, you did have to be there. Some of it is just like the flood of what happens over time. Again, like, remember when like Poison the Well Nerdy came out? That one
Huge.
song took over America. It took
Yeah.
over American hardcore. It like changed everything for everyone. The whole Trust Kill Ferret moment happened because of that. And again, if you went to a kid now that's coming up in like the Knocked Loose
They
era
don't
and you're
know.
like, yo, you got to listen to Nerdy, these kids are going to be like, dude, I hear 50 songs like this every week, like I can throw a
Yeah.
rock and hit 100 bands that are doing this. And so you can never again experience like Hatebreed when Satisfaction came out, like when that first Poison the Well came out, the opposite of December, it was like, this shit blew people's minds. Again, the first H2O record, like, to be there in the moment and feel like, what is this? I've never heard anything like this before. It's cool. It's cool to see kids again seem to have that experience with like Turnstile or Knocked Loose or some of the huge bands of right now. But I do think that that's kind of an obstacle towards how bands get carried into the future. And especially another thing in hardcore is that hardcore happens in the room. You got to be in the room. Like, you got to see the kids jumping off the speakers and doing front flips off the stage and the whole place going bananas. And like, when you are there in the room and you experience it, you're like, this is a spiritual experience. This is totally life changing. It blows your mind. But then if it's 15 years later and you're like, yo, just listen to this record on CD, it's like, all right, man, like, yeah, it's cool, I guess. Like, so much of it is
Yeah.
just, you have to be in the room in the moment.
Yeah, I've tried to show a lot of my friends that aren't really into hardcore records, and some of the recordings are very threadbare, they're very elementary, and they're just like, yeah, yeah. Like you said, they don't really get it. It's one of those you had to be there things. You have to be in a packed room with 100 people at a VFW hall with kids going crazy and diving off the stage. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to process it. And as a result of that, I have a friend. He's been a buddy of mine forever. He's super into that really produced sound. He's super into that really accessible sound. And I've showed him bands like VOD and Blood Simple, and he can actually get into those bands. But anything else that is very specific, is very underappreciated. He just doesn't get it. And me having been to 20 plus years of hardcore show, it's like I've been there. I get it, but he will not get that, and it's sad. And
Yes.
like you said with Poison the Well, that was huge. That was huge, and nobody talks about that band anymore.
Yeah.
I'm like, why?
I know. I listen, we see it all the time because we're from, I mean, I couldn't even tell you how many, in terms of like band generations, like how many generations ago we are, 4 or 5, from 20 years ago, whatever.
Yeah.
And so when we're still around and we experience it, because it's like, in my estimation, I would say there's probably two bands of our generation that really have propagated into the future, into 2025, and it's Have Heart and Ceremony. And that's great. They were contemporaneously the two biggest bands of our generation. So in the moment, they were the biggest bands then. It makes sense that they would be the ones to get carried into the future. But it never ceases to shock me the bands that the kids don't know about. And I'm just like, holy shit, like, Modern Life is War, who like still I think is
Great
very
band.
big for our generation, but I don't think the young kids know that like how incredible they were, and they were like a transcendent experience. When My Love My Way came out, it seeing them live was unlike any other thing.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say is that it's same thing. Like if you think about like traditional hardcore, and again, maybe I'm in the wrong circles or I'm not seeing or talking to the right people, so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about, but it's like I'm always shocked at the dearth of Sick of It All kind of conversation in the modern hardcore ecosystem, to whatever extent I experience and see this stuff. But it seems like from the OG generation, it seems like it's Madball and Gorilla Biscuits. That
Yeah.
like those are the two bands that like made it all the way into the future.
Persevered.
And like you don't hear about Agnostic Front, you don't hear about Sick of It All. Sick of It All should be the Radiohead of hardcore for forever. They should be the
Oh,
kind of the
sure.
number one band forever, but it's like it's not. Gorilla Biscuits still crushes, Madball still crushes, and there's all these other bands that, again, I think you basically get like two bands a generation or so, kind of get propagated into the future.
Thursday. That's another band nobody talks about anymore. Like Understanding in a Car Crash, a Jet Black New Year,
Yeah.
huge. And nobody says a word about them.
Yeah, I mean they still do very well. The
Oh, do
the
they?
oh yeah, for sure. For
I
sure.
never
They'll
hear about them.
Oh no, up they'll draw 1,000
Okay.
people or something when they play up here. But they were part of the pop punk emo explosion of the early aughts, and I think all of those bands had this 2020s resurgence where it all became popular again. And again, like my chem broke up because not wasn't really happening for them anymore at the time, and now they play Giant Stadium.
Mm.
So I think a lot of the bands of that era, if they stuck around and persevered, they are all still, they do very well. you know but the bands from just the wave before them, and like Jeff from Thursday used to book local hardcore shows in Jersey. He used to book Inside and all these Long Island bands in like VFWs and basements in Jersey. So like those dudes also all came up on that same generation of hardcore. And
Sure.
it's not anybody's fault, especially with the kids of this era. Like they are bombarded with content just
Content.
all day, every day. And just like,
Yep.
dude, it's like, remember when you were a kid and like somebody being like, yo, you got to go check out Zeppelin. And you're like, get out of my face with this shit. It's like, I don't have time for this. And it's like, imagine
Right.
saying that to a kid now of like, yo, you got to hear Hatebreed Under the Knife. And it's like, then they go and listen to it. And it's like, it sounds like it was recorded in a fucking
Tin
dumpster.
can.
Yeah. It sounds like literally the recording studio was a dumpster. And you just be like, get out of here with this.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. 100%. And so with Crime and Stereo, you guys got linked up with Nitro Records, which, okay, here's another underappreciated band. My friend Andrew Pinching, actually played drums in the band The Damned, and I
Oh,
saw them at the Warp Tour, and n-
in the Nitro
they could,
era when they were on
in
Nitro.
the Nitro era,
I
yes,
love their
they
their album on Nitro, the one with Gotta Go Surfing, that one.
100%,
Yeah.
100%. So do I. But at the Warp Tour, people could give a fuck about them. And you want to talk about removed. I mean, they were so far removed. They were one of the OGs.
OG.
They were
Yeah.
doing it back in the 70s. And
Yeah, yeah,
like,
yeah.
neat, you listen to a song like Neat, Neat, Neat,
Yeah.
that fucking jams.
I know.
Like, you could get in your car and just, in fact, they used it in Baby Driver. That's how awesome of a song it is. You get in your car and just tool around and drive super fast and listen to that song, and it fucking kills. But yeah, people couldn't give a shit about them at that show. And, that was a label that my first band wanted to link up with. And I talked to Pinch about that, and I was like, "Hey, man, gonna set up with Nitro," but never happened. But how did it happen with you guys?
Weirdly is like a really weird part of like the Crime and Stereo's insertion into like a weird niche corner of rock history. The guy whose voice is saying keep them separated in the famous Offspring, come out and play song. The guy who goes, gotta keep them separated, is this dude named Jason Kendall, who lives now in Seattle. He was Dexter Holland's best friend growing up, and he was Offspring's original roadie, and it's his voice in that song, and he's also on the second record, on the Ixnay on the Hombre record. And he spent a bunch of Offspring's early years in the Smash and Ixnay era. He was on the road with them. And then he moved with his wife up to Seattle and had 2 kids. And Dexter was bummed when AFI left to go to DreamWorks or Interscope. And he kind of felt like that was the end of that era. When he had like AFI and Aquabats and the Vandals and Jughead's Revenge, he had that like Nitro in the 90s was like a really, they were up there with Fat. Like they were a very serious label. Yeah. Like they Guttermouth, remember like the Guttermouth, the Monkey record, like that record was huge. So basically by the early aughts, all of those bands either broke up or had moved on. AFI moved on, and Dexter was like, he was like in a funk about not having any new bands to sign. He's a pilot and he owns several planes, and he flew his Learjet up to visit his best friend in Seattle, the Keep 'Em Separated guy, and he played him our first record, Explosives and the Will to Use Them, the one that was on Blackout. And was like, yo, there's this band and we didn't know him. Like we'd had no idea that any of this was happening. And this dude plays him the record and was like, yo, this band is sick. And Dexter flew his plane back to LA and went to the guy who did A&R for Nitro at the time, this dude, Sean Zebarth, and just was like, yo, do whatever you got to do, sign this band. And weirdly at the time, we were talking about breaking up because we had a really bad experience on Blackout, and we're done with Blackout, and we were trying so hard to get on all of the labels of the moment. We wanted to be on Jade Tree so bad, and they, weren't into it. And I just remember I remember giving, weirdly, we wound up later on Bridge 9, but I remember specifically handing our demo CD to Chris Wren at Crazy Fest in Louisville. We were at Crazy Fest, and I gave Chris and this dude Max, who he was running the label with at the time. I remember trying to get on Bridge 9. We tried to get on Jade Tree. We were trying to get on Equal Vision. We like really gave like the full court press to try to get on Equal Vision. None of them were into it. And our friend Jay Reason from The Distance.
Reason, yeah.
Shout out, great dude. He was running Stillborn for Jamie Josta at the time. And he was like, yo, we'll sign you. He was like, we love the band. We'll sign you guys, and we were all like, we clearly do not fit on Stillborn. But they were like, we love the band. We'd be down to help. And we were like, what do we do here? Like, do we sign? And again, like, we were very happy to have the offer from Stillborn, but it was like clearly not the right fit. And we just did not know what we were going to do. And we were literally sitting, myself, Mike, the bass player, and our singer Christian all worked together at Justin from Glassjaw's merch shop at the time. And so like in the early days of this merch shop, it was basically the whole staff was the guys from Crime and Stereo, Kill Your Idols, and Silent Majority, and Hugo from On the Rise. And we were just like sitting there like, what are we going to do? And then this email pops up in real time as like Mike's email, queue is opened in front of us. And it's just a cold email from Nitro Records being like, yo, we heard the first record. We love it. We'd love to sign you guys. Can we take you out to LA and see what we could do to sign you? And they were so generous. Like we went from having nothing. We had never gotten any money. We'd never done anything. They gave us 25 grand to buy a brand new van. They bought us like literally off the
Oh,
lot. They were like, "You guys want to tour?" We're like, "Going to tour?" And we're like, "We need a van." And they bought us a brand new Econoline 350 off the lot. Gave
oh,
us, money to make troubled states. They just were like, "Yeah, whatever you guys need." And Dexter, honestly, was super cool about everything. Lived on a different planet. This is like a guy that like literally had $80 million or whatever, and was just like, yeah, like, what? Oh, you need a van? Like, get him a van. You need what else? You need? Oh, you guys need like studio space? Come out. You can borrow Offspring Studio. They used to like lend us the Offspring Studio. They used to lend us gear. They would just be like, yeah, like they would point to like a wall, and when I say a wall, like a warehouse, like a 20,000 square foot warehouse wall that was just road cases from floor to ceiling, and they'd be like, "Oh, you guys need to borrow like 2 Marshall heads. Like, there's 15 of them over there. Like, go grab 2." So they were super cool. I know AFI, um, who just put out like their new record, and I've seen that Davey has been doing all this press, and I've seen that like a lot of it was pretty critical of their time on Nitro, which is totally fair because if we sold 1 million records on Nitro, I'm sure we would have a different set of feelings about, kind of our expectations from the label, which AFI did. AFI literally, before they were ever on a major, they sold over 1 million records when they of just their Nitro catalog years, which is ludicrous, absolutely ludicrous.
sure.
Um, so I understand them having, I'm sure, extremely valid frustrations and things that they did not like with their experience with Nitro. But that wasn't us. We didn't sell 1 million records, and we were treated very well. And that run of bands, it kind of breaks my heart because they signed at the same time. They signed us, Wilhelm Scream, No Trigger. Um, who else was part of that like slate of bands with us? Rufio. They signed like 5 or 6 bands at the same time, and everyone was great. Like the Wilhelm Scream records that in the same
Amazing.
year they put out Wilhelm Scream Ruiner, Crime and Stereo Troubled Stateside, and No Trigger Canyoneer, and like it was amazing. And they kind of revamped the whole label, and then Dexter lost interest and folded it. And to his credit, let everybody out of their contracts. So he sold the label to Concord Craft, who was like one of these like mega conglomerate
Yeah.
corporations where they own.
Victories with them now.
Exactly. So before he sold the catalog, he let all of his bands out of their contracts, like let everybody be free agents, no strings attached. They were very legit to us.
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's a really sounds like a really, really just appreciative label. And one thing I wanted to ask to rewind a little bit, and it's interesting. I think they actually follow me on Instagram. What was the reason for the whole? You mentioned there was a bad experience with Blackout Records. Can you delve into that a little bit?
I guess, yeah, it's not like it's not like I'm reluctant to do so. It's more just like I don't really have a full memory of the specifics
Sure.
of it. Blackout, I'm trying to like go back in my memory here. What happened was Blackout became a subsidiary of MCA, which doesn't even exist anymore. But
Mm.
MCA in the 90s had Blink 182. They got Blink for Dude Ranch and Enema of the State. And so they were riding high and trying to snatch up all these punk assets. And that was at the time a very popular thing, was that these major labels would turn indies and turn them into subsidiaries, would like snatch up the indie labels and turn them into subsidiaries. And Blackout had at the same time, they had the first H2O record and Sheer Terror. And I can never wrap my head around why anybody thought Sheer Terror was going to be this like major label thing, but they did. I remember specifically this moment where like they legitimately thought that Sheer Terror was going to be this like huge next thing, and Blackout had that first H2O record, and it was right around that time that we were signing that I think H2O went to MCA for the Go record. And anyway, that's what happened, was that Blackout was independent, became a subsidiary of MCA. And if any of this is wrong, I apologize. This is just how it was in my memory. I'm not claiming that this is 100% accurate. It is accurate that they were a subsidiary of MCA. And when we signed to them, we went to like the MCA offices to sign with Blackout. And at the time, they had just maybe like 2 years earlier done No Gimmicks Needed with Kill Your Idols. And we asked the guys at Kill Your Idols, like, yo, should we do this? And they were lukewarm on it. You know, they were kind of like, if it's the only thing that you guys have, like maybe, but, you know, I don't know. And I just remember feeling very like, I want to say unsupported, but it's like, I don't know what the correct level of support would have been, but we were kind of just like on an island. Like the owner of Blackout was like, I can give you, you know, $3,500 or whatever I think it was to record the first record, but you have to use this specific recording studio because like I have a deal with them. And so like you can use the B room in this studio in Hoboken, and ultimately that's where you have to make the record. And then we went there, and there was no producer, the engineer was like in audio engineering school at the time, and these were like his like observation credit hours. And so if you listen to Explosives and the Will to Use Them, that is a bunch of 21-year-old kids in the studio by themselves. Statement. Yeah, like we had no supervision, we had no producer, we didn't know how to make a record, we didn't know how to really write songs. And quite frankly, that's kind of the difference between Explosives and the Troubled State side, is that like the Troubled State side is the same. Like there's great material, I think, on Explosives. There were cool lyrics, there were great riffs, there were great leads, but there was like no adult in the room to kind of help us put all of this together. And you can see like between the impact that Stateside had on our careers versus that Explosives did, you know, a lot of times like that's the difference, is just like having like the proper guiding hand to help you maneuver through these things. That's actually why our EP is called The Contract, was that we were not getting along with Blackout and it wasn't a good experience, and we asked to be let out of our contract, and he was like not without kind of like giving me something. And so we were like, all right, we'll go in and record this 4-song EP and you can have it, and then let us go. And he said okay, and that's why we named it The Contract. And then it was right after that like just out of like providence, out of like sheer fortuitousness and providence, that Nitro just from LA, like cold call reached out to us and flew us out to LA to go hang out with Dexter Holland and all of his planes. And
it's amazing.
It was amazing. Yeah, it was super cool.
Yeah. That's and interestingly enough, I didn't know that he was a pilot as well. That's really cool. A Learjet. Wow. That's had to been rolling.
That's our favorite Dexter Holland story, is that, so yes, he has a Learjet with, I don't know if he still does, 20 years ago, he had a Learjet with an anarchy symbol painted on the wing. And it was like at the height of those guys' success. And he had this like crew. It was like him, Tim Armstrong from Rancid, Fat Mike from NoFX, and Dickie Barrett from the Boss Tones. And they all would just like constantly take his jet from LA to Vegas all the time. And they would just like go to Vegas and like ball out and do like high roller. Like they would, you know, always playing like Hands of CeeLo for several $100s a hand. But anyway, my favorite Dexter story is the very first time we met him. They bring us out to LA. We're in their offices, it doubled as, so it was a giant warehouse, a huge, enormous warehouse. That half of the warehouse was the Nitro catalog. So all of the merch, all of the vinyl, all of the CDs. And again, you're talking about, they had the full AFI run, Vandals, Guttermouth, aquabats, like it was a lot of just stuff. And then the other half of the warehouse was Offspring's gear. And so, like I said, it is just floor to ceiling road cases, amps, guitars, like $1 million in gear. And that's the warehouse. And then attached to the warehouse were the offices, which were both the Nitro Records office and like the Offspring's like management team kind of ran out of there. And Offspring has all of their platinum records. Like every inch of this place is covered in platinum records. They had 2 diamond records at that point. So both Smash and Americana were diamond, so over 10 million copies. And the first time we sit down with Dexter, we're shooting the shit and he's showing us, whatever his planes and stuff. And then he cuts the meeting short and he was like, yeah, I got to go. I'm flying to Russia to pick up a MiG. And we're like, what do you mean? And he's like, in Top Gun, how like the bad guys in Top Gun are flying like the MiG fighter jets. And we're like, yeah, of course, we've all seen Top Gun. And he bought a decommissioned MiG fighter jet in Russia that the guns had been taken off of. And him and a pilot buddy of his were flying his Learjet from LA to Russia. And they were going to pick up the MiG. And then his friend was going to fly his Learjet back. And he was going to fly the MiG back. And that was how our first meeting with him ended, was him being like, all right, bros, I got to go pick up this fighter jet in Russia for my personal collection. And we were just like,
God.
Oh, and the funniest thing, we were like, yeah, like you're buying a fighter jet? And he was like, cheaper than a Bentley. And we were like, damn, like this dude balls out.
Whoa.
People,
wow.
When you talk about like underrated things, people do not understand how many records Offspring sold. At that time, this is the early 2000s, so this was like right after Blink-182 had done the rock show. Offspring had sold 2.5 times the records as Blink-182. That like at that moment when this had happened, Blink-182 had 20 million records sold. Offspring had 50 million records sold. And first of all, Smash sold 16 million copies on Epitaph with a 50-50 royalty split. So they got 50% of the royalties. This is still when everybody's paying $20 for CDs, way before piracy. And they sold 16 million records of Smash with a 50% royalty rate. Then they sold millions of Ixnay on the Hombre and the next one. And then on a major label, I think they were on Columbia, Americana with Pretty Fly for a White Guy. That sold 11 million copies. And then every one of their other records was at least platinum. So they had like 50 million records sold, and all of the royalties just go to Dexter and Noodles. So it's 2 guys. So it's like, think about having 2.5 times the Blink-182 money and then split only between 2 guys instead of 3. Like his next door neighbor was Billy Bob Thornton. He had a mansion in Beverly Hills, and Billy Bob Thornton was his next door neighbor. And we were also there when they had this whole Nitro label meeting of Dexter being like, we're signing the boxcars, which was Billy Bob Thornton's like, I don't even know how to describe, like booze.
And it was interesting because there's a famous interview with Billy Bob Thornton where they're on the air, and Unknown Hinson actually he's from around here. He actually did the voice of Early Kyler. I don't know if you've ever seen this, but they're interviewing him for the Boxman is what they're called.
The Boxman. Okay, yeah.
They're interviewing them, and the interviewer talks about Billy Bob being a prolific actor, and he just shuts down. His brain just shuts down. He says, I thought I told you that we weren't going to be talking about any of this shit.
He's like, I'm a musician. I'm here.
It was and you could see the rest of his band. You could see Unknown Hinson and the rest of his axemen just in the back, just like, oh my God, I can't believe we're going through this right now. And it just comes off as the most arrogant, most pretentious, douchiest interview that I've ever seen anywhere. I'll have to send you the link to it because it's just like mind blowing.
Yeah,
like, man, just roll with it, dude.
Exactly.
Like, just go. Yeah. So, but anyway, he signed the Boxman.
No, he didn't. But we were there. We just happened to have been there, like coincidentally, as these discussions were going on. And so as an aside, whenever we were in California, they let us just do whatever we wanted. So we would roll up to, every time we were in California, we would roll to the Nitro warehouse and we would just take copies of every AFI record on vinyl. We would load up on merch. I own every piece of AFI merch that has ever been created because we would just steal things from their warehouse and they just did not care. So we were always hanging out there. And
Wow.
we were there as Dexter was saying to the staff, like, yeah, we're going to sign the Boxman. And it was because Billy Bob Thornton was his next door neighbor and they were bros and they would hang out. And Billy Bob was like, oh, I got to get my band signed. And Dexter was like, I own a label, like my vanity label. Like, I'll put you out on my label. And then he clearly went to the staff at Nitro and was like, we're doing this. And you could just see that everyone like politely was like, yo, man, you know, like, no, like, you know, like, please do not make us do this. And you could also see that Dexter was like, this is my label, you know, like this is my label. I will do
Right.
as I please. And I don't know, I know that they didn't ultimately sign them, but we were there for like this like very awkward meeting of the like A&R staff at Nitro being like, please do not make us sign Billy Bob Thornton's blues band. And then ultimately
Wow.
Nitro folded because he turned it into a hot sauce company. That is what happened to Nitro. He started a hot sauce company called Gringo Bandito, and
Gave up on Nitro.
yeah, he sold it to Concord Craft and then started this hot sauce company, which I believe ultimately was successful. You know,
Yeah.
listen,
Huh.
man, if you have $100 million, like, do what you want to, you know, do what you want to do.
Oh yeah. That label, anything he directed into it was probably just play money.
Oh, for sure. This was all like passion projects for him, you know, like
Right.
all of it. And again, like he was a super cool dude, but also if you spend your whole life with $100 million, you eventually just do not live on planet Earth anymore. You can still
No.
be a super nice, super cool dude, but you know, that just is what it is. I remember distinctly in that meeting that he said the first time we ever met him, and we're all kind of chopping it up. And he was like, you guys like being on tour? And we were like 23 at the time, 24. And we were like, it's the greatest thing that's ever happened to us. Like, we love being on tour. It's the fucking best. And he was just like, that'll change. And I remember in the moment being like, what a dick thing to say. Like, damn, like we're so enthusiastic. You're this like world, you know, arena headliner or whatever. And we're like, what a dick thing to say. But he was 100% right because he was in his
Oh
40s
yeah.
when he said that. And I remember at the time thinking it was a dick thing to say. And now I'm like, that is exactly, you wouldn't realize you're being a dick, but it's like, I probably would say the same thing to like a super enthusiastic band. I'll be like, yeah, you guys aren't going to love being on tour for forever, you know?
I wonder if it's one of those things where whenever Offspring tours, they have their own separate tour buses. Like Slayer does it, Metallica does it, a lot of bands do it, and it
They
comes
fly.
off as
They
oh
fly.
they oh well yeah, that's true. I guess
Yeah,
they would fly.
they
Yeah.
fly on his jet. So the band members fly on his jet, and then
And then the
the
crew goes
crew
on
goes on the
buses.
bus.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
They do.
Oh, I
They
guess
like
that makes
literally like that's
sense.
like
Yeah.
Iron Maiden shit.
But when I heard about Slayer and Megadeth doing, well, I don't know if Megadeth does it, but Metallica doing the separate tour bus things, like you had mentioned, when he said that'll change, it comes off as pretentious to go in different tour buses. But then you think about it, like you've been in a band with somebody for 20, 30 plus years, and it's like, when you're done with a show, you just want to decompress and be away from those people. And
Totally.
so if you have the ability to have your own living quarters and be kind of sequestered off from everybody else, it's like, why not? You know, like I get it. I get it now. If you got the money, do it. Do it.
Totally. Also, I will say that like a lot of that, as I have seen from like the kind of major headliners, a lot of it is that because these guys bring their families out. Is that like at a certain level of success, the you know, a lot of times the wife doesn't need to work, the kids they don't care if they pull them out of school for a month to go travel the world or whatever. And so everybody gets their own bus and they have their wives and kids with them and it becomes like a life experience for the whole family, which is great. And also, if you've ever been on a tour bus, like listen, they're amazing and
They
spectacular
are.
if you're used to riding in a van. But if you have to
Oh
live
yeah.
in one for 6 weeks. It's like having a Motel 6 room. It's not like you're like at the Four Seasons, you know, it's
Right.
like having like a regular ass hotel room. And so then if you're talking about you've been touring for 30 years and now you're sharing your Motel 6 room with 7 other guys every day, like having one to yourself if you can afford it. I think all of this is it's less an element of pretentiousness and ostentatiousness and really just more like a preservation of your
Practicality.
mental health of like, you know,
Sure.
it's tough.
Well,
I mean, listen,
interesting.
the road is it grinds you down, you know?
Yeah. Well, interestingly enough, I have been on a tour bus. My dad actually used to drive them for musicians, and it is a sweet ride. Let me tell you. Like, he took us camping one time in the tour bus, and
That's
we just
awesome.
had it absolutely made. Yeah, we didn't have to do like an RV, or we didn't have to sleep in tents or anything. It was just like you wake up in the morning and you're just like,
That's cool.
I slept in a nice bed today, and
As a
yeah, I
kid,
got to meet.
as a kid, I couldn't even imagine how cool that must be.
Oh, and he brought it to the school, and like everybody just thought I was like the shit for a while, and I was really just a big geek and nerd, and my dad had a really cool job, you know. But they are definitely kind of like cracker boxes after a while, to
Yeah.
where you know the bands would want to go and just get an actual hotel,
Yeah.
you know, just because they don't want to be on the bus. It is kind of like close quarters. It is kind of confined and restricted too. But
Yeah.
you know, with Crime and Stereo, you guys went from Blackout to Nitro, and then you guys landed on Bridge 9. And I remember you did the album Crime and Stereo is Dead, and everybody was talking like, wait, what are they gone? Are they broken up? Like, what's going on? What was kind of the meaning behind that title? Was it kind of a precursor to like, we're going to be done, this is kind of our last outing? Or was it more kind of like you were laying to rest the old sound and you're coming into something new? What is kind of the symbolism behind the title?
We weren't we definitely weren't breaking up. It was like a twofold title. It actually came from uh I was raised into third degree master Freemason that year, that same year that we made that record. I was like inducted into one of the 12 presidential lodges in America. I'm a
Oh, this interview's over. No.
no. So yeah, I am a Freemason in Teddy Roosevelt's lodge. I don't know that
Oh,
I've ever said
wow.
this in an interview before. Yeah, I signed the same charter. My signature is on the same piece of paper as Teddy Roosevelt's. Um,
Whoa.
and that was that same year, 2007. That was the year that I was raised into the third degree of Freemasonry, and all of that is a symbolic death. That's what the whole thing is kind of based around, is like the symbolic death of your previous self and the kind of raising of this new kind of resurrection.
Right.
And that was where the title came. That's why. So if inside the if you take off the main cover that says Crime and Stereo is Dead, the thing underneath, so it's like the black night sky that says Crime and Stereo is Dead, and then underneath that is the sunshine clouds, and it says Long Live Crime and Stereo. And it was kind of the same thing as like the regal maxim of like, the king is dead, long live the king. Um,
Right.
and that's where that came from. And then like the kind of double entendre was about the change in sound, which wasn't intended to be so pronounced. But we did know that kind of the new record didn't sound like the Troubled State side. It was glossier ultimately than any of us intended. And that was pretty much all in the production. So like there is an evolution in sound. But a lot of those songs are fairly similar to the Troubled State side songs. The thing that really makes those records sound totally different is the production. So it was a little bit more of a departure than we had intended, but we did know going into it that like we were doing a new thing. And so it just seemed, and the third reference in that actually was that we were also stealing it from De La Soul, who was a Long Island rap group. And they had an album called De La Soul is Dead. So that was like the tripartite, meaning behind that.
Sure.
Yeah.
What were you guys sort of channeling whenever you were recording that record? And was kind of the stylistic change a conscious decision, or was it just kind of a natural progression, like an organic thing?
It was organic. Like we just write the songs that we write, and then how they come out is how they come out. But our approach has always been to kind of like see what else we can do with hardcore. We're all hardcore kids, we're hardcore lifers, but like I said, like traditional hardcore never wasn't really my full appeal. I never wanted to sound like Madball or Cro-Mags or whatever. And the bands that most influenced me were the bands that were seeing what else they could do with it, you know, and the Relationship of Command and Shape of Punk to Come and The Argument. And that's really where we were always coming from. And all of my favorite records, that's what they did. I think that's what Avail did. It's what Lifetime did. It's what Silent Majority did. It's, you know, all of these bands, that's what they were always doing. You know, Lifetime's another band where it's like, now it's a genre. Lifetime is its own genre. There's 5 million bands that are just doing Lifetime. But at the
Or Kid
time,
Dynamite?
yeah, it's like it was only them. Like only Lifetime was doing it at the time in the moment. Um, so that's kind of always been our approach. Again, go listen to Silent Majority, Life of a Spectator. Like, tell me how much of a hardcore record, a traditional hardcore record that is. It's not. You know, it's not by any stretch of the imagination. It's basically one hardcore song on it. You know, popular opinion. So anyway, that's always been our approach, is like, what else can we do with this? And that was the approach on Troubled Stateside, you know, and we thought we nailed it. You know, we just felt like we did a really good job with that. And then by Is Dead, we were like bringing in these kind of other elements. That was when we started doing a lot of like dance drums, you know, the kind of like indie rock influenced, you know, like dance drums, and so like the 4 on the floor beat. And we were just honestly fucking around, seeing what else we could do with it. The falsetto vocals that are all over Is Dead was because we didn't know Christian could do that. And then we like went in to do that record, and all of a sudden he was like a much better singer, because we had been on tour at that point for 2 years straight. And now all of a sudden, like, he can do all of these things that we did not know he could do. And we were like, get it, like, boom, like hit record, get it in there, you know, like we were
Yeah.
really kind of finding out that we were better, you know, musicians than we thought we were. That sounds pretentious, but it was like we didn't know that we could do all this stuff. And so by Crime and Stereo is Dead, that's really a lot of what you're hearing, is like in real time us seeing where our limits were.
Sure. And it's a great fucking record, man. Like
Thank you.
when I heard it, I was just blown away because you had such, I don't want to even say a drastically different sound, but it was kind of like a wallop upside the head where you were just like, "Oh, wow, what a difference," but in a positive way. It was a positive
Yeah.
progression, and yeah, I think that record stands the test of time, and I think that, it I think it's going to go down in the annals as like a really great hardcore album. And you know, after that, though, well, not immediately after that, but not too long after that, you guys had called it quits for a certain period, and then you guys came back. What was the reason for the breakup initially?
Some of it like personnel. We were having a hard certain we were having a hard time. Certain members were having a hard time getting along. And again, like nothing insane, but really just like it's like being married to 5 people at once, you know. And
Oh
we
yeah.
at that time we had been on tour for 6 or 7 years straight. Like it was a lot, and we were very burnt out. And Christian and I, the singer, and myself, were like about to turn 30. We had basically been on tour since we graduated college, and we're about to turn 30. The writing was on the wall with the Trying to Describe You to Someone record, that it was doing well. Like we didn't break up at our lowest point. We actually broke up at our peak. We were at the height of our careers when we broke up. And the
Yeah.
reason was that we could see then that that wasn't going to be the record that blew up. but it was at the very beginning of the album cycle. And even like, we had one of the biggest booking agents in the world at the time. Like our booking agent was Metallica's booking agent. We had the same agent as Metallica and the Strokes and Muse and Neil Young. This woman is an absolute legend in the music business. We had a manager who was very huge. Like at that point, we had the team, and they were like, "All right, this record is going to do good, but it's not going to be the one. And so we'll do this album cycle, and the next record is going to be the one." And it's like at the beginning of an album cycle for touring, it's like that's 2 years. So it's like you're saying we're going to go on tour for 2 years nonstop. Then we're going to come back home, write and record another record. Then we're going to start touring on that. And then hopefully everything's going to happen for us. And we're like, we're going to be 35 years old, hoping now at 29, that like maybe things will shake out for us at that time. And if we had been in a good place personnel wise, I think we would have stuck it out and did it. But Christian and I really just kind of like couldn't fathom keeping the stress level that we were at and the frustration level going for another 5 years. And weirdly, I don't know why, I swear to God, it never occurred to us to just be like, well, we don't have to be a full-time touring band, like we could just slow down and do it. I just think there like wasn't an infrastructure, back then for bands doing that. It was like basically like you are either full-time 10 months out of the year, or you break up and you go do something else. And that was what we did. And then when we got the band back together, now we have the ultimate lineup. It's, the three guys that always got along. And then we brought in two of our other best friends. And we literally, since 2013, 2015, we got Eric Fairchild, our bass player, in 2013. We got Brett Romness, our drummer, in 2015. And we have never had, not just a fight, we have never had an argument in 12 years or whatever. And now with this iteration of the band, we've never had a disagreement. We've never had an argument. We're all best friends. It's been amazing. And if that had always been the case, yeah, we never would have broken up.
Never had a disagreement, even if it was in a civil manner? Nothing?
Not anything that ever like even, like progressed to even like an argument, and nothing more than just like super chill. Everything is super chill. Yeah.
A question that I typically ask people, I guess the Dexter Holland one would be a really interesting story, but the craziest tour experience that you've ever had, either, on the road or maybe not even necessarily tour experience, like craziest thing you've seen at a show, anything wild that you've kind of encountered while in the world of hardcore, aside from Dexter buying a MiG, of course.
Yeah, that was a big one. I don't know. We've been very lucky. Like we've seen some super cool shit. I got to stand there. Like I stood there and watched Lemmy play Kerry King from Slayer in Pool once, like we were all backstage at the same festival that Motorhead and Slayer were playing. And like Kerry King and Lemmy were just like off by themselves shooting pool. And I was just like, I'm just going to fucking lean up against this wall right here and like hang out and watch this. I handed Crime and Stereo CDs to Taylor Hawkins and all the guys from Foo Fighters, met like really wild, cool people that we never should have kind of had been anywhere near. I'm trying to think off the top of my head of anything particularly crazy. Again, with like super blessed. We played with Stone Temple Pilots when Scott Weiland was still alive and in the band. We played with fucking Aerosmith, and I will tell you, we were with Slash once. We played a festival with Slash where Slash, they bill him as Slash, and then he does all the Guns N' Roses hits, and he has a singer that can actually sing Axl's parts, and this was 15 years ago.
Right.
And we play this festival, and when he shows up, and you got to realize, like, at these festivals there's basically like an artist pavilion. It's not like backstage because everything's outdoors, so they set up a huge like circuit, an enormous circus tent, and then only the artists are allowed to be in there. But once you're in there, like, everybody's in there. And again, it's like Stone Temple Pilots are walking around, and fucking Angus Young is walking around or whatever, and Slash shows up, and he sits on this bench, and look, I mean, literally, top hat, the hair, chain smoking, ripping heaters. And he sits on this bench, and as if it was organized, which it wasn't, everyone just starts queuing up like a line near the bench that he is sitting on to shake his hand and say, "What's up?" And I'm looking at this line, and it's all the guys from Fall Out Boy, all the guys from Anthrax, like, just all of these rock stars, like world famous rock stars themselves. And they all stood in a line to just shake Slash's hand and say, "What's up?" And Slash, to his credit, sat there for 2 hours and said "What's up" to every single person that wanted to say "What's up" to him. And he did not seem put out by it. He just seemed like the fucking coolest dude in the world. And he just sat there, chain smoking bogeys, and like just talking to every single person that wanted to talk to him. But it was
That's
insane
amazing.
to see, because it looked like a fan meet and greet. But it was like everybody that's even in the
Just him
room
hanging out.
is already a world famous millionaire. And they all treated Slash like they were, fans. It
Wow.
was wild. I saw Billy Idol at that same thing walking around. He was like 60 years old, shirtless, tan, leather jacket, no shirt underneath. Guy looked fucking amazing. He looked like it was 1983 in the Rebel Yell video. He was probably 60 years old. So
Wow.
anyway, we got, like, Crime and Stereo, like, got to, not that we deserve to be there, just sometimes you find yourself in these places, but we just got to be in all these like cool places. We saw, it's like Dave Grohl comes walking by with John Paul Jones from Zeppelin, like as they're like in the middle of
Yeah.
a conversation.
Wow.
Yes, cool shit.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
wild. One thing I wanted to ask about is after Crime and Stereo kind of went on their hiatus, you went and started doing political campaign management. How did you get into that? And what was kind of your impetus for going along that career path?
No, it's the opposite. That was before Crime and Stereo. It was actually as Crime and Stereo was getting off the ground. I was doing that in the
Oh,
early days of Crime and Stereo before we became a full-time touring band. It's one of the reasons I stopped doing it, was because Crime and Stereo started touring full-time. That was my job
gotcha.
right out of college. I had
Okay.
my undergrad degree is in political science, and after college, I thought so. I thought that I was going to be a lawyer. This is before there is a Crime and Stereo, any of that. I thought that I was going to be a lawyer. So when I went to undergrad, um, I got a degree in political science, which everyone told me was like one of the best. I was very interested in politics, but it was also one of the best like pre-law majors. And then I went to work in this law firm on Long Island, which is the managing partner is the lead counsel for the New York State Democratic Party. And so he's the guy who basically gets to decide. He's an attorney, and as lead counsel for the Democratic Party, his specialty is in election law, and he's basically the kingmaker. He's the guy that actually gets to decide who gets to run for things, like who gets the Democratic Party nomination. Not for the more public facing things, like congressmen or whatever. Like those things really kind of are based on who can whip up the votes. But on the judicial side, the who gets to be a judge is like really some backroom dealing shit, like, because nobody knows who the judges are, and judges don't campaign. I'm sorry, they campaign, but they're not allowed to have platforms. You basically can be like, "This is my name and I am running." You're literally like legally not allowed to have a platform.
Nonpartisan too, right?
Yes, exactly. So that's why a lot of times when you go to vote, you'll see that oftentimes the same judge is the candidate for the Republican and Democratic parties, because these guys just decide, they're like, we're giving it to our guy, and then both parties put him on the ballot under their thing. So it's like, you have to vote for him. There is no alternative. And that, if you look closely at your next ballot, for the judicial races, very often that's how it is, which is how I wound up running campaigns for both the Democratic and Republican parties, because
Wow.
as like a little inside baseball thing, if you really like, listen, if you're a punk hardcore person, you're already disillusioned with government. If you want to be really disillusioned, you will have my experience, which is all of these people work at the same law firms. So all of the Republicans, all of the Democrats that work against them, that run against them, they are all partners at the same handful of law firms. Their offices are right next door to each other. They all go out to lunch together every single day. It is an utter illusion that, that there is this like wide gap between the parties. And so I started working for Democratic judicial campaigns for people that were running on the Democratic ticket. I started in family court. So these people to get elected to family court judgeships. And my first two campaigns were very successful. My judges won. And then the guy who owned this law firm, who is the lead counsel, was at the time, I'd have to look up if he probably actually still is, was the lead counsel for the New York State Democratic Party. His girlfriend was an attorney who was a Republican, and he was just like, you're going to work on her campaign, and you're going to get her elected for the Republican Party, and was his girlfriend. But again, like, he also would have these lawyers that worked under him. He was the managing partner. His name was on is on the firm. But he would have guys that worked under him, and he would be like, yo, next cycle, we're putting you up for Republican district court judge. And then he would just call his bro, who was his counterpart in the Republican Party, and be like, yo, you put my guy up, I'll take one of your guys. Nobody will run against them on the ballot. Everybody gets in automatically. So politics this isn't the highest level. So I'm not talking about like at the presidential level. This is local county politics, but it is all backroom glad handing. Politics is high school cool kid shit for successful professionals. Essentially, all these people that become lawyers, they become lawyers or doctors or whatever, and now they're all successful adult professionals. Well, they're all millionaires. They all live in the nicest towns. They all drive Range Rovers. They're all millionaires. How do you determine who is cooler than who? It's like, how do you have the high school popularity contest? And in reality, it's politics. That is actually what they do. All of these lawyers want to then become judges. And because like once you become a judge, like, and I'm telling you, like, I have seen this up close. You can't imagine the juice that a judge has in just the social sphere of their day-to-day life. If you've ever met a surgeon, it's like that. Like, meeting a surgeon, you realize that it's like everywhere they go, they get so much they get level 10 respect from every single person they meet. It's like everybody that they ever meet goes, holy shit, you're a surgeon? Like, oh my God, I can't believe it. It's kind of like being like the rock star of the adult professional world. And judges get the exact same treatment. It's like being a surgeon. Everywhere you go, people find out you're a judge. It's like your meals are free. You get the best table. Your rooms are comped. Like, there is so much social juice in it, social capital in the role. And that's how millionaire attorneys have their cool kids club. And that was, and anyway, I did that for a couple of years. It's very lucrative. The money was astounding for a kid right out of college. I was getting paid, I think, like $1,500 a week, to last like that, like 22 years old or whatever. Like the money was incredible for me at the time, but it's not cool. And it was actually that experience that made me realize that I'm never going to be a lawyer. It was working in that law firm that I was like, oh, I'm not doing this at all. Because you realize like what they do is all of the lawyers that they work you to death for the first 15 years of your career. And so you are working 14 hours a day, just doing paperwork 7 days a week until you're 40. And then when you're 40, they make you a partner and you're a millionaire and you never do anything again. And so it's basically like, are you willing to eat all of this shit for 15 years? And then you're essentially like retired and glad handing and hobnobbing from 40 on. And I was just like, I'm not doing this. And that was it. So that was the end of I never went to law school. And Crime and Stereo, that was right around we got signed to Nitro. I started touring. And yeah, that's that. It was actually also through, I was going to say, it's through that time in my political career, that is how I became a Freemason as well in Teddy Roosevelt's Lodge.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. But it grinded you down. And, I got hit by a car a few years ago, and I went through an attorney, and the money exponentially decreased what they were saying I was going to get as a settlement each time. And then he had to bring in a different lawyer as a partner. And I'm like, I wonder if somehow they're just partitioning off different portions of the fund that I'm supposed to receive, but they're giving me some sort of bullshit story as to why I'm not getting all of this money. I was like, what do you mean you have to bring in another attorney? Why can't you handle it on your own? And it's like, this attorney got X amount of dollars, and then the other attorney got X amount of dollars. And I'm like, I feel like you guys are just doing some shady shit behind the scenes. And I'll tell you what, the reason I think that is because after I got my settlement, I ended up going to a hotel and linking up with some girls. I am leaving the hotel and the attorney is in the lobby checking in. And I'm like,
Yeah.
this is a fucking craziest coincidence ever. I guess maybe he thought, maybe he had eyes on me to like, don't fucking do anything stupid. Like
this is
you
how
get this money.
Yeah, this is how the common person, really winds up getting short shrift in the system, is that like, you don't understand that all of these people are like, for example, if you're on trial, it's like, it is a 99% likelihood that like the defense attorneys are friends with the prosecutors and
drinking beers afterwards. Yeah.
these guys are all in the same world. And moreover, they all go before the same judges like every day. They can't risk running afoul or harming any of these relationships. And in real life, that is what happens, is like when the judge makes it clear that like, yo, this guy should take this plea deal, even if the guy's like, I did not do this. And even if the defense attorney believes him, it's like they're having private conversations where the prosecutor's like, yo, we'll hit your guy with this plea deal. The judge is like, listen, man, I don't want to do this bullshit trial. Get your guy to take the, and even if your defense attorney, if it's in your best interest, and even though he has a fiduciary responsibility to do what is in your best interest, he's not going to run afoul of that judge, because the whole rest of his career is going in front of this judge every day. So if he knows what the judge wants, that is what is going to happen. If the prosecutors are like, yo, we'll give your guy a plea deal, but he's going to jail, we don't fucking care if he did it or not. And I don't think people realize like what a high school cafeteria kind of culture the legal system is, and the political system is completely an extension of the legal system. Everyone is a lawyer. Everyone that is a politician is a lawyer. They all come up through the same ranks. And I'm not even trying to be on some like the government is corrupt, like smash the system shit. It's just like,
you are 100% right.
That is what it is. Like, these guys are all friends. They all do power lunches together. Their wives play fucking pickleball together. Like, just like how you have a social crew with, your people in your community, like they do too.
Barely.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, you're 100% right. And it's crazy, man, because, I have certain ideological leanings, but as I start to even get older and more into it, it's like that whole quote about being wings on the same bird is just so profound and just resonates with me so much now.
Yeah, it's like, listen, you gotta think about like, we can all partake in the political process. And so like, I want to run for office. It's like, well, at a certain point, you have to get the endorsement of one of the major political parties, and those decisions are made by some leading partner in a law firm, and these law firms are all the election law. They're all the firms that handle election law. And again, it's like, I'll give you another example without naming names, but you could easily Google this. It's common knowledge. The guy who is the chair of the New York State Democratic Party, who is a Long Islander. He was first the chair of the Nassau County Democratic Party. Now he's the chair of the New York State Democratic Party. He owns a very expensive summer camp for kids upstate. He's a Nassau County guy, but he owns a summer camp upstate, and it's like $40,000 or $50,000 a summer or something like that. And everybody knows. Let me say, everybody knew. My frame of reference is when I was doing this 20 years ago. So if all of this has changed, I apologize. But at the time, he was a millionaire. How did he get into the millionaire, set? He owned this highfalutin summer camp. And everyone knew that if you are ever going to seek any sort of nomination from the Democratic Party, your kids better be in that fucking summer camp. And so, and that is absolutely what happened. And I met lawyers who were young in their careers and did not have that kind of money yet, but they had their eyes on their ambitions for the future. And they fucking scraped together that money to send their kids to this $40,000 a month summer camp, because it was like, you're never getting in with this guy unless your kids go to this camp. And it's like, is that bribery? No. But we all understand, we go well, that's how the world works. It's like, it is how the world works, but it's super fucked up. And so, yes,
buttering him up. Yeah.
Yeah. You can claim anybody can run for office and anybody can, partake in the system. But it's like, I don't know, man. I don't know if that's entirely true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's partially true, but as with anything, you got to have connections. You got to know people. I lived in Hollywood for a few years, and it really is about who you know. And one thing that you mentioned with people being chummy behind the scenes and hamming it up and eating lunch and things like that, in like a high school mentality, I've always kind of equated the world to being like a playground or like a sandbox, and that it just gets bigger. Nobody really changes.
No.
Like everybody's going to kind of have their own mannerisms and their own behavioral traits and all those things that are kind of set within you at a younger age. But the sandbox just gets bigger. That's really the only difference. And people that are bullies are probably going to be bullies into adulthood. People that are nice are probably going to be nice into adulthood. It's just kind of I don't know. At least that's from my perspective. I don't know how you feel about that.
No, the greatest heartbreak of my adulthood was becoming an adult and looking around and going, where are all the grown-ups? You think that when you're young, that you're going to arrive into adulthood and then you're going to be surrounded by grown-ups and adults, but you just are no, everybody's still 15 years old. These are 45-year-old 15-year-olds, and everybody
Crazy.
There is very little maturing and very little casting off of your more youthful aspersions. It's like everybody is just a grown-up version, like you said, of who they were when they were 18. And when you become an adult and enter the professional world and the professional workplace, it just fucking blows your mind that you're I cannot believe these are the people I am surrounded with. I thought there were gonna be grown-ups here, but there aren't. There never are. They never arrive. And that to me is the great tragic realization of adulthood is no, there are no grown-ups here.
Such a bum out. It's such a bum out. I always ask this question: what is one piece of advice that you would give to your younger self?
To be more To be more cognizant of like, I'm trying to think of how to phrase this. Like when when I was younger, I thought that being myself, that there's like some kind of element of like keeping it real. It's like, hey, this is who I am. I'm being me. I'm not faking anything. I'm not trying to be anybody else. Like I am legitimately being myself. And being a guy in a band, there were all these times where you're in a town or you're at a show or you're in like these other things, and like you have your own life and you have your own inner turmoil and you have your own things going on. And sometimes like you don't want to fucking deal with it. And you're like, yo, man, like I'm playing a show tonight. I got a show to play. Like, let me play my show and, whatever. And I have all these other things that I'm thinking about or going on or whatever. But for so many other people, it's like, that's the one time they're ever going to meet you, or like that's the one time they're ever going to see your band. And when you are a band guy, I think a lot of band people, guys and girls, would tell you this, that like people calcify their experience with you forever. And so it could be something that happened, 25 years ago when I was a fucking teenager. And they're like, oh, those guys in Crime and Stereo are fucking dicks. This one time, I tried to say what's up to this guy and he just like walked right past me or whatever. And it's kind of jarring to now be like an adult and see these things of like, and I'll see somebody that'll be like, oh, the guy's fucking, and he'll mention something in passing from one show in like a town in Iowa 20 years ago, but it's like that calcified in their mind as like, oh, I know those guys. I know what they're about and I
Yeah.
know what they're like and like they're fucking whatever. And part of
By
me
some
goes,
sort of minute interaction with you.
exactly.
Yeah.
Or it's the same thing. It's like I'm fighting with my girlfriend on the phone and I walked past you and didn't stop to say hi or whatever. And a part of me goes like, well, they're dumb. Like they're dumb and they're silly and whatever. But there is another part of me, I would say the larger part, that's like, if I could have given advice to my younger self, it would have been like, yo, man, these fucking people are going to and also let me say this. This isn't to absolve myself entirely and be like, I was never a dick and all these people are, blowing it out of proportion. Like, I'm sure there are many instances where I was actually a dick and people rightfully, kind of marked it as such. But that's what I would say to my younger self, is just like, if you're in fucking wherever, Iowa City or Asheville, North Carolina, or fucking Warsaw or whatever, this might be the only time you're ever in this place. This might be the only time these people ever interact with you or interact with your band. You also should realize that, like, you are representative of your entire band. And so it's like, if you're a dick one time, people are like, those guys are dicks. Crime and Stereo
Right.
are fucking
Guilt by
jerks or whatever.
association.
Yes. And so, like, that's what I would say is just like, I don't think I realized the degree to which like a single memory becomes calcified as somebody's the entirety of their experience with you and your art and you as an artist and whatever. And I would have been more accommodating, I think, had I known
Right.
that.
Put your best foot forward
Yeah.
always. And
Yeah.
what you were saying about people maybe misperceiving your actions. I had a buddy that was so convinced that I just straight up ignored him one time. Like I passed him on the street. I didn't see him. He was in my peripheral vision, but I didn't see him. I had my headphones in. He was shooting a small scene for an independent movie. And he went on for like months about that. He was like, "Why the fuck did you ignore me?" And I was like, "Dude, I really didn't see you and I didn't hear you because I walk around with my headphones because I don't want to have to interact with all the crazies on the street of Los Angeles." I was like, "I swear to you, man, I swear to you." And so it may just be our misperceptions that, maybe somebody was just having a bad day or somebody was tired or something like that. You really have no idea of the full spectrum of what's going on with a human being when you do meet them for the first time. So it's one of those things where you kind of have to give people the benefit of the doubt. But if it's a consistent pattern, then you're like, yeah, maybe that guy's a dick.
Totally. No, exactly. It's totally fair, you know. And I'm
Yeah.
sure I'm sure
Yeah.
with me it was both things, you know.
Yeah. I've definitely been a dick. I've
Yeah.
knowingly been a dick
Yeah.
sometimes. But yeah, like you said, you may never get a chance to see these people again. So just
And
try to show up and put your best foot forward
you
for
know, and
sure.
the other thing too is that like a lot of times like the fans are younger than you. And so their perception of you is always like as a elder statesman or whatever who like should know better, which is fair, is like a fair position to take, but it's like then you also lose sight of like, well, I was 24 at the time. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, was I
Right.
this like complete, you know, well put together mature adult? It's like, no, I was the same, you know, at 24 I was marginally more mature than me at 19, you know. So um whatever. It's fine. You know, what I would say though too is like being in a band and people having not a real conception of like what it is like being in a band. I think a lot of times that gets misconstrued as like, oh, those guys think they're rock stars. You know, like I tried to say what's up and they walk right past me and like they think they're rock stars. And it's like, dude, you know, who fucking, you know, like who knows where my head was at on a, you know,
Exactly.
yeah. It's like if I walk down the
Exactly.
street in a fur coat, you know, making it rain out of the top of a limo, and you know, I blow off the show entirely because I'm like with hookers in a penthouse, and then you want to be like, yo, that dude is a fucking rock star, like dickhead. That's fine. So
I hear you, man. No, and that's great advice for sure. And as an arts and media guy, I always have to ask people, what are some of the things you've kind of been influenced by in the past as far as arts? And we've talked quite extensively about music, but arts and literature, films, books, and what are you currently watching, reading, and listening to at present?
okay. I am finishing The Maniac by Benjamin Labatut, who is a Chilean writer. He won the Booker Prize for his first novel, which was called When We Cease to Understand the World. And his second book, The Maniac, is about Johnny von Neumann, who is considered the smartest person of the 20th century. He like is basically described by like Albert Einstein and Richard Feynman and Oppenheimer as like they were scared of him, of how smart he was. And he's the guy that invents and develops game theory. He creates really the first ever computer, which was called the Maniac, the first version of a modern computer. And anyway, book called The Maniac. It is fucking mind blowing because it's basically it's all about this guy and the work he does in the 1930s and 40s and how it is that work that is giving rise to machine learning now and AI. Basically, AI is built on what is called von Neumann architecture, and it is all the stuff that this guy invented. And it's the book is very interesting. It's like written in it's a fictionalized version of nonfiction. Very good. Anyway, it's called the Maniac by Benjamin Labatut. I'm also reading a book called wow, the one that I just started. Dog of the South, which I'm like 3 pages into. It is by the author of True Grit, and I picked it up because the Coen brothers said that it is the funniest English language novel ever written. That it's the funniest thing that they've ever read, and that's why they made True Grit. This is their favorite book, but they thought that it wouldn't be a good movie, and they loved the writer so much that they made True Grit, which was another one of his novels. So I'm finishing up The Maniac. I'm a couple of pages into Dog of the South. Watching nothing worth recommending, I don't think. If you haven't seen Eddington yet, the new Ari Aster movie, I thought was a fucking masterpiece.
Okay.
Yeah, please see Eddington. Do you know Ari Aster?
Oh
He's the
yeah,
guy that did, yeah.
Hereditary and Midsummer. Yeah, and I was on the fence about seeing it because it just looked like something so drastically different
It
between
is.
the aforementioned movies. Okay.
It is. It's not a horror movie at all. Um,
Okay.
did you see Alex Garland's Civil War?
I did not, but I do like Alex Garland a lot.
Oh, Civil War is amazing. But the Eddington
Okay.
is basically like as if Civil War was about COVID and George Floyd, the COVID George Floyd year. I
Okay.
think it is an absolute masterpiece.
Okay.
So and then listening to what have I been listening to? All these new records keep coming out that are the new Spiritual Cramp, I think is very good. I was just at the Military Gun Public Opinion show last night or 2 nights ago. That was very good. Military Gun killed it, and Public Opinion killed it. That was amazing. Skinhead, have you heard Skinhead? The
No.
Skinhead record, the new one, the new full length, which is called Life is Beautiful. Something. Let me get the. Have you heard Skinhead at all?
No. I've
Okay.
heard of Skinheads.
Oh my God. You got to get into Skinhead. Skinhead is
Okay.
a one-man band from like he's got a full band, but it's basically one dude who writes everything, plays everything, makes the records himself. He's a hardcore dude from New Hampshire who I think lives in LA now. The new record is called It's a Beautiful Day, What a Beautiful Day. And he is just taking the piss out of fucking everything. It is so clever and so acerbic. The songs are so good. There's a song "Kill Yourself" that is so phenomenal. Have you ever, Fucked Up?
Yeah.
Incredibly similar sound to Fucked Up. So if you like
Okay.
Fucked Up's best stuff, but all the
Then
songs
I
are
would
two
like
minutes
it.
long. It's like the opposite of they don't have 6 minute long songs.
Yeah, that's
It
one kind of gripe I have with Fucked Up is like
Yeah,
the chemistry of Common Life. The songs are like 6 or 7 minutes. I'm like, holy shit.
same. So imagine Fucked Up, but everything's much more upbeat and the songs are 2 minutes long and just super acerbic, taking the piss lyrics. Skinhead. Yeah. Their first
Okay.
record was very good. The new record is spectacular.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think of what else. I've been listening to that new Spiritual Cramp a lot. I really, really enjoy them as a band. And I don't know. I love music. Music's great, So there's always cool stuff coming out, that I'm listening to. I wish I was more prepared for this question. I'm trying to look at my my search history. Public Opinion from Denver is fucking dope. I've been going back and forth with this Geese record. I'm not sure if I like it or not. I'm not sure how I feel about them. Geese? They're like on top of the
I
world
don't.
right now.
No.
They're like the biggest thing in the world right now. They're Brooklyn dudes who do very strange music. And I'm not sure. I will get back to you as to whether or not I am on the bandwagon with this. They are Gutting a Body of Water, who goes
Okay.
their new shit is dope. The new Nothing stuff that I've heard from the new Nothing record that's about to come out, that shit is amazing. I love a lot of I love Fontaine's DC and Murder Capital and a lot of the like post-punk stuff coming out of Ireland. I love Royal Otis from Melbourne. I think they're
What
one
do
of
you
the
think
best
about
bands in the world.
funk?
Funk as a genre?
Funk, not Funk, Phonk. I always ask people
Funk.
this too. Not always, but yeah.
Funk? What is
Funk.
that? What is that?
Oh, it's almost hard to describe, but it's like atmospheric and electronic, like synth driven music with like trap, drill rap, hip hop vocals over it, but like really driving beats. Like it's crazy. It's like vaporwave meets hip hop, and it's awesome.
Really? Can you give me an
Yeah.
artist to check out? Because I have not heard of funk.
It's a group that the first time I had actually heard of this, and then I went down this massive rabbit hole, is a group called Last Century. And they spell it L, like all the vowels are replaced with X's. So it's
Okay.
Last Century, but like, and I'll send
LXST.
you yeah, I'll send you some of their really good songs actually. But that just kind of blew my mind. And then yeah, I went down this rabbit hole and started finding all these other artists. And ordinarily something I wouldn't think of that I would enjoy, but just got way into it and just especially Last Century, like they are probably the pinnacle of the iceberg as far
Oh,
as
sick.
that whole subgenre is
No.
concerned.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm uh I'm way into it. I'll check it out. I'm weirdly like, so I work with teenagers in Brooklyn, and so I am always at the forefront of like the cutting edge of shit that like these kids are like, yo, whatever they are listening to, and you're like, that sounds ridiculous, that sounds insane, I've never heard of such a thing. And then 8 months
y-
later, they are the
You're into
fucking
it.
biggest artists in the world. I mean, it's unbelievable seeing up close, like really how teen culture kind of drives what is the cutting edge. And it's like these kids listen to artists, and you're like, oh, this guy isn't even signed yet, and the YouTube videos will have 11 million
300
plays or
million
whatever.
views.
Just the
Yeah.
Spotify listeners is like 4 million monthly listeners, and you're like, this guy's doing this in his bedroom. And they are always like at the cutting edge of that shit. So
I'm
I'm always
so
down with it.
jealous. And
I
and
know.
like you mentioned with kids coming up, having the ability to play music and just being leaps and bounds beyond anything that we ever experienced as youths. The ability to market themselves is insane. It's just so insane, like how these kids. I remember meeting a kid. This is fucking living in LA doing like gig work and DoorDash to like make ends meet. I did a DoorDash delivery to a house, and this kid answered the door, and he was like, God, like 20 years old or something. I'm like, you live here? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, what do you do? And he was like, oh, I'm a gamer. I'm like, you're a gamer? And he was like, yeah. And I was like, he's like, this whole house is just like a collective of guys that do gaming and stuff. And it was like a magnificent, opulent house in the Hollywood Hills. And I'm like, fucking hey, man.
My wife is a very big podcast executive at
Okay.
one of the biggest companies in the world in that biz. And you truly would not believe the numbers that get thrown around that I just hear, because she works from home. And so like I'm passing through the room or whatever, and I hear the numbers that get thrown out for these podcasters, and it is head spinning money, hundreds of millions of dollars to like one person. Like these
Right.
people that are there, the owner creator of these podcasts that just catch on, these true crime murder podcasts or whatever. Like their advances are in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
I
It's
have no doubt.
bananas.
I have no doubt. I just made my first $100 after 4 years of doing this
Hell
channel.
yeah.
I'm like, hey, this is like a hardcore band, you know?
Yeah, honestly, it's the same thing as what happens with music, is that it's a double-edged sword, because now you don't need a PR firm. You just need your own social media. You can do all that shit yourself.
Yeah.
But the flip side is no one, none of the labels, none of the management firms nobody is willing to take you on for them to do that legwork to get you big, because they'll say to you, they'll be
Exactly.
like, listen, man, your shit's cool, but you got 500 followers or whatever. Get that shit up to 50,000 and come back, and we'd be happy to sign you.
Oh,
And
such bullshit.
that's what it's like. And it's the same thing in that business, where they're like, yo, your podcast can be great, but like we don't fuck with numbers that small. And so like
Yep.
you have everything at your disposal. You have the same tools that everybody else has. It's like, get your numbers up, and we'd be happy to talk.
But there's also that whole where they artificially inflate the numbers, where they'll go and buy followers and subscribers. And I've seen this so many times. There's been a few people that reached out to me to be on this show where they have like hundreds of thousands of followers on Instagram. And then you go to like the amount of likes that they
Mm-hmm.
have on their comment, and it's like 3, 4,
Yep.
maybe 10, and I'm like, bullshit. And it's like, I don't want that sort of disingenuousness. Like,
Exactly. No, no, no. Totally.
like, and that's one reason why I don't inflate the numbers, where I'm just like, you know what?
Yeah, it
It,
doesn't do
it,
you any
it
favors.
really ain't about that. Yeah. Well, and they'll also, a lot of these people get their Instagram or YouTube channels or whatever shut down because they are inflating the numbers,
Yep.
because the algorithm will turn around and say, wait, these are not real followers. These are bots. You
Yeah.
boom,
Yeah, you buy a
cut
bot
off, you
farm,
know?
a bunch
So,
of and
so you run the risk.
they make a lot of terrible decisions that way. Before my wife was in the podcast, she came from the music business before she went to podcasting, and she used to work at Rock Nation. And like she signed Action Bronson. She was who signed Action Bronson to Vice Rec. She was the manager of Vice Records, and went to Rock Nation. And I remember distinctly that it was like right when Yo God, I don't know how into rap you are, but it was right when Yo
Oh,
Gotti.
Gotti.
Oh, it was right when he
I
came out
tell
with
all
that.
my hoes, rake it up.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
know. I
So
know that
it
song.
was right when Yo Gotti came out with Bag It Up, Rack It Up, whatever he was saying. That
Yeah.
I think it's called Bag It Up. Right when he came out with that, and they were planning for his tour. And I again just like overheard these conversations, and the opener was between a Boogie and somebody else. And they were talking about who they're gonna get to open this tour. And I was like, yo, A Boogie is the biggest thing with all the, this was before he blew up, but it was like all the kids that I work with. I was like, every kid, this was like right when A Boogie and Little Uzi Vert came, like right when they both came out. And I was like, it's all the kids talk about. A Boogie is going to be the biggest dude in the world. Everybody is on this guy. You have to put him as the opener for this thing. And they wound up going with the other person because the other person had more followers. And that was it. That was the only thing they based the decision on, was they picked the person with more social followers. And like 5 months later, A Boogie was one of the biggest artists in the world, and this other person was like gone forever, and you never heard of them again.
Such bullshit. That's
Yeah,
crazy. That's
yeah.
wild. I meant to ask you, what do you do as far as work with teenagers? What's
Oh,
your
I'm a
profession?
high school teacher. I teach global
Oh,
history and economics in a
oh,
high school in
cool.
Brooklyn. Yeah.
How do your students feel about you being in a band? Do they think, I
They,
mean, much like Chris. Chris has worked in
yeah,
the school system as well. Yeah.
yeah. They think it's cool. Again, they don't have a frame of reference, so they think that I'm a rock star because I'm on Google. It's weird because like they live on the internet, and it's a very strange dichotomy. It's like you would think that they would look at anything that doesn't have 50 million followers or whatever and be like, oh, like all the shit is lame, you know. But then on the flip side, it's like if they can find me on Google, they're like, you're a real rock star, you know.
You're legit. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So
That's crazy.
it's cool. I mean, truly, it's funny because it's like you could say like, oh, like what do the kids think about this and blah blah blah. It's like the degree to which teenagers think about their teachers at all is, 1 second. You like it is you one molecule of their bandwidth is going to thinking about what the personal lives of their teachers might be like.
Sure.
Like you're lucky if you are even on their radar as a teacher who was standing in front of them every day, so they don't care. Ultimately, they don't care.
There's an English teacher that I want to look up because I was like super in love with her. Let's see what she's doing, what she's up to. But I haven't been. I do, but
Yeah.
I did think about her a lot. But anyway, what is in the works for Crime and Stereo?
Next year, 26 is the 20-year anniversary of Troubled Stateside, and we're gonna do a Run for Cover Records is doing a big double gatefold LP with like a 60-page full color booklet. They're doing like the full whole crazy shebang for to re-release that on vinyl, and I'm very excited about that. So we'll be doing shows around that, playing Troubled Stateside, and we'll do festivals, and we're trying to get the next record out on Pure Noise, and get hopefully the next full length out. Our drummer and guitarist are both producers, and they do huge stuff, and so they are very booked up. They also produce the Crime and Stereo records, but they do a bunch of huge stuff. Our drummer Brett does all the Hot Mulligan records. He did the new Anxious record. He does a ton of like huge bands. So that's really our thing. It's not these guys have a professional schedule with that is their main source of income. And even though Crime and Stereo also gets a recording budget and we do have money, we would never ask these guys to turn down a job from some real band and do some real band's records so that they can do ours, even if the money is equal. So it's more about like finding gaps in their schedules, you know, and just having them be like, all right, I actually don't have anything booked for these 3 weeks or whatever. And so we'll try to get in and do it then. So definitely Troubled Stateside 20-year anniversary and hopefully new shit. We do as much as we can. We try.
Dude, I'm stoked to hear it because, like I said, I think you guys' sound is just constantly evolving and it's always interesting. I went through the whole discography while I was working, and just to see like the maturation between each record. It's just like you guys are constantly doing mind-blowing things, and I think you guys are gonna continue to do that. And I'm really excited to hear what you guys have
Thank
to
you.
offer here in the future. Yeah,
Appreciate it,
absolutely,
man.
man.
Thank you.
And fucking awesome conversation, man.
Yeah,
I
dude.
really appreciate you coming on the show, and I want to thank everybody that attended the show. And like I had mentioned before, do me a favor, help me pump the numbers up, people. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and click on that bell for notifications for upcoming shows.
Buy a
And
bot farm in Ukraine.
but yeah, exactly. Um, and we also broadcast the audio episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So if you want to go over there, and if you can't watch and you can listen, go over there, check us out. Give us a rating too. That helps us out exponentially
Hell yeah.
in the algorithm. Everything's algorithms nowadays. So yeah, please support. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, I've got a merchandising company called Hell's Heart Merch Co. Going over to hellsheartco.bigcartel.com. Use the code podcast for 20% off your entire order. Find Bella Canvas, Next Level Tri-Blend t-shirts. They feel amazing. If you like movies, if you like hardcore, check it out. My mom likes them, and that's what's important. So anyway, thanks everybody for attending. I appreciate you all so much. Namaste. God bless. Be good. Thank you so much, Alex.
Thank you. This was awesome.
Hell's Heart, life's a game.